introduction, scale of health innovations. So looking forward to hearing from him. So with that, why don't I just go to Kristen, who can start us out with a few insights.
Hi everyone, super excited to be here. Happy Bring Our Children to Work Day, which I hope is going well at Labor right now. It's my team that's putting it on, so I'm eager to jump in this afternoon and see how everything's going. We host about 100 kids, so we have exciting creative plans for them, and actually that day inspired something that I'll share in just a couple of minutes. I have 2 kids books with me that are actually more management oriented than some of the management texts that I've read in my MBA or in my professional career. So I'll just start by letting you know a little bit more about engagement at Labor. So I started at Labor in September of 2016. It's been a fast 2.5 years. My office was created to combine training and development and diversity and inclusion, and then also tackle the, I won't say beast, but the opportunity of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, which, as probably some of us know, is launching in just a couple of weeks. So our office was created under Secretary Perez to really focus wholeheartedly on engagement. And over the 2.5 years, I've tried to explain what engagement is to our community, to other communities in the DC area. And OPM has some pretty fancy IO psychologists developed definitions of engagement, including sense of purpose and motivation and commitment. My bottom line definition of engagement is that if you care for employees, they'll care about their work. And that has seemed to resonate really well with folks because it's easy to remember. It really gets at the heart of engagement and why we're doing all of this. And it really establishes a hardcore business case for engagement because it's not just a nice thing to do for employees. My passion around this work is that it happens to be helpful for employees and organizations, but really that caring aspect has flexible implications across organizations. For us, that means offering flexibility when we have the opportunity to focusing quite a bit on training and development, making sure that employees' work is meaningful. So I love my job. I'm so honored to do it at Labor because I really feel strongly that we're influencing the world of work. So let me share these 2 texts with you. As I mentioned, my management go-tos. The first one is Beautiful Oops. This is a kid's book, but not really, by Barney Salzberg, and someone that I worked with previously when I was at the Boston College Center for Work and Family, someone who works at Prudential Financial, gave this to my older daughter when she was born, along with an impressive collection of a number of other books. But this was the one that's really stuck out. And to avoid a total show and tell, you're welcome to take a look at it after, but the last page is one of my favorites. Actually, the last 2 pages. So when you think you have made a mistake, think of it as an opportunity to make something beautiful. And it's just so resonates with me because I think one of the things we focus on at Labor and one of the things I think it's really important in life to consider when it comes to innovation is doing something with something that went wrong. And not, I mean, sometimes in terms of celebrating failure, we hear that a lot, that we should aim to make mistakes. In government, that doesn't really fly, especially with limited budgets and limited resources and time. So what we really try to foster is productive mistakes and learning from them. And then one other book that I actually gave to Secretary Perez when he left, and along with the debt stack and a couple other politicals, is What to Do with an Idea. And I'll just read the back briefly. What do ideas become? Big things, brave things, smart things, silly things, good things. Things like stories, artwork, journeys, inventions, communities, products, and cures. Everything you see around you was once an idea. So what will become of your idea? Now that's up to you. And I wrote a message in it to each of those departing politicals that said, this is somewhat unconventional in terms of a parting gift, but they were really the ones who helped to found the DOL Innovation Council. And it was just so meaningful for me to do something different in terms of them leaving in the spirit of innovation.
So let's go to David next.
Hi everybody, Dave Milestone. I'm with the U.S. Agency for International development in our Global Health Bureau, and I lead a group called the Center for Innovation and Impact. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our global health work, USAID is the largest funder of global health and development assistance around the world, and just in global health alone, annually we distribute about $6 billion worth of global health assistance, doing things like distributing vaccines in Nigeria, to training health workers in rural parts of Malawi. And as a global health community, we have really ambitious health targets. These are called the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically health is SDG 3. We are nowhere near on track to meeting those goals by 2030, and so we as a community recognize that we need to be doing things differently. We need to accelerate progress on things that we're doing well, which we do a ton of day to day in global health. But we also recognize that there are new opportunities and new challenges that we need to address in new ways. So from migration to temperature extremes to various different macro economic things that are happening in the world, we need to address these new problems in new ways. At the same time, we're seeing new opportunities to try development in different ways, especially around how we finance development. And so it was with that sort of perspective that the center was founded about 8 years ago. And we work in really two primary ways. One is around catalyzing innovation. And we do that primarily through an open innovation approach. So we run what are called grand challenges, and these are open innovation competitions, recognizing that we need the world of problem solvers to help us think through how we can tackle some of these tough, long-standing global health challenges. And so we run USAID's largest and longest-running grand challenge, for example, called Saving Lives at Birth, which is now in its 8th year and has funded over 100 different innovators, from an Argentinian car mechanic who came up with the first innovation in obstructed labor in over a decade, called the Odon device, to a group of students up at NYU University that came up with a new business to help protect healthcare workers during an Ebola outbreak. And so we're seeing this as a real practical way for USAID to work with non-traditional partners. At the same time, we marry that with a team that's focused on making sure that we get those innovations to scale, because we know that traditionally, especially in health, it's a very long and arduous process getting through things like clinical trials and getting on health lists in these countries in which we work. It's a very complicated process. So we bring a team that comes primarily from the private sector, that brings different skill sets to the traditional sort of skill set that resides at USAID, to more deliberately look at how we get those innovations to scale. And then we underpin all that work in 3 ways. One is around digital health, so making sure that we're using data to inform our decisions, but also leveraging new technology in new ways to complement our work. Partnerships with the private sector. We know that we can't do things alone in global health, and so we've developed some flagship partnerships with the likes of GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Merck, even Coca-Cola, to bring their, for example, supply chain expertise in to help us improve our health supply chains. And then human-centered design. So we've been doing a lot of work to more deliberately bring in the principles of design into inform and sort of mainstream how we work in global health, but also use human-centered design as a way to complement our traditional approaches in global health. So this has been a journey, and I would say that one of some of the key success factors for us being successful are the following. One, bringing in new skill sets and new mindsets into global health. I think we are a 15-person team out of 685 people just at USAID Global Health Washington alone. So we're a pretty small team. That's about 2.5%. I know this off the top of my head because I use that number a lot. So everything we do needs to be different and catalytic. In many ways we're a rounding error. So it gives us the flexibility to really take risks and push new ideas. But at the same time, I think the main reason we've been able to be successful in our time there is because everything we do is demand driven. So we are part and parcel. We work side by side, all our colleagues in the Global Health Bureau. So everything we do is a priority for the Global Health Bureau, and helps solve a problem for our colleagues. And so I think, making sure that we are, we describe innovation as both incremental and disruptive. Making sure that we're spending time on disruptive innovation. These are reaching new populations in new ways. These are what we often call big game changers, and I think what gets a lot of the buzz around innovation. But we spend most of our time on working with our colleagues around incremental innovation, and this is where a lot of the change can happen. This is the part of moving a big ship. And so I think differentiating between those and being very practical and taking the buzz out of innovation and making it practical and a problem-solving tool for people has been what has allowed us to have some success in the Global Health Bureau. So I look forward to sharing some of those scars and lessons learned in this discussion today. Thanks.
Great, thank you, David. Sharon?
Good morning. I'm Sharon Kirschbaum. Yes, I work at the Department of Human Services. For those of you who aren't as familiar with local government, DHS provides, and I call this the original DHS. We provide both homeless services, we do enrollment and eligibility determination for federal benefit programs, for SNAP, for TANF, Medicaid, and then we have another program, and I'd actually like to spend a little bit of time sort of sharing a bit of a case. And I think a year ago I would have said this work unit, it's our TANF Employment and Training Program, was a model for innovation. And we had gold star buzzwords and boxes that we checked that fit a lot of what we talked about today. But probably within the past 6 months, I think we had a real reframing on the problem and realized that our innovation was not really getting to what we wanted to. So just indulge me in doing a bit of a dive on that. So the TANF Employment and Training Program, for those of you who aren't that familiar, to receive temporary assistance for needy families, there are work requirements. The goal obviously is get people employed so they're off of TANF and they can be financially independent. So we had probably one of the earliest performance-based contracts where we have providers and their job is to meet with our clients and figure out if they need training, get them placed in a job. And if they got people placed in a job, they got a bonus. Sounds like the right approach. And we had some success doing that. Our providers are all nonprofits. Our staff was really involved both in crafting the contracts, monitoring the contracts, and looking at data. We had data and we looked at data and we used that to make incremental change along the way. Again, I would have said spot on. The data that we looked at was really at participation in the training, meeting with the case manager, doing the work hours, but also in job placements, and even who still retained a job after 6 months. So as the team looked at data, they saw, you know what, results are really not so high on participation. So they kept trying new, innovative, agile tweaks to the program. Maybe we need some sticks. Maybe we'll have some sanctions. You're going to get your payments cut if you don't meet your requirements. We tried some carrots. We're going to give you a bonus if you're able to meet your work requirements. We even added home visits. Maybe people just need to be motivated, and if we had someone come, knocked on the door, figured out what was going on, we could really motivate them to come. Again, I just think that that's usually great gold star for making change and not being locked in. Time went on, we had some placements, but we had a lot of folks after 6 months who were back in the system, who didn't stick it out. So one of the things that we did for the first time, which we probably should have done years ago, was actually talk to the customers to find out what's happening here. It was incredibly illuminating. Some basic things. The job placement provider that I have to go to, it's across the city. Well, we give you a Metro card. Yeah, but you know what? I've got childcare, and they want me to take a job that's at the other end of this city, and that just doesn't work for me. Well, we thought we had transportation help. That would be enough. But you know what? I wasn't really getting to the real need. We found out from customers that getting a job is not going to continue to motivate them. That people have passions and things they want to do. And yeah, I could take a job now as a medical technician, but I really want to be a nurse. And you let me do a job training, which is a 6-month certificate program, but if I could go to school for 2 years and become a nurse, that would make me excited to get out of bed in the morning. And guess what? If you're a nurse, you're going to continue to have the opportunity to get into the middle class, where some of the jobs that you're placing people in, that was a paycheck, but that wasn't going to get them really into financial independence. Sounds fundamental. The thing that was also really hard, though, was to convince our staff, who were incredibly well-intentioned, that they didn't always know best, and that one size doesn't always fit all. So we actually had speakers come and really work with us on socializing the idea of what it means to sort of craft, your destiny. And I'll tell you, the speaker came and asked a question. I want to ask the question of you because it really, I think, gave us all an epiphany. But everyone in the room, you are offered your dream job. Everything you've ever wanted in a job, you're going to increase your salary by 50%. But it's across the coast from where you live. How many of you are going to take it? You've got 3 weeks to start. How many take it? Okay, there's a couple of hands, but there's a lot of hands that don't go up. Because you're thinking what we're thinking. Well, my partner's job is here. I got a kid in high school. I don't know if it's the right time for me. My family's here. I have a sick mother. I need to stay. I mean, you name it. We are all sitting here thinking about reasons why we're not going to take that job. But we have clients who come to a case manager every day who's saying, well, why aren't you taking the job? It's a good job. It'll give you a paycheck. But nobody had that lens on, we don't know the full frame. We don't know what's going on in that person's real life. And until we are a little bit curious about what do you really want, if you have a trauma that you're still dealing with, you don't have the wherewithal to go to a training class, to get a job and hold it down. What you need for 6 months is maybe some wellness and some self-care to be able to take a breath. And then I'm going to come back in 6 months and you'll be ready. Having those kinds of sensitivities, understanding has been a game changer, and it's both how we treat our customers, how we do everything based on what the customer needs. That is hard for government workers to do. They now, I think, get it. I think a lot of the initial socialization of why it's important has sunk in, but how you do your job means just tabula rasa. You don't always know best, no matter how well-intentioned you are, but where does that take you? How do we market this program? How do we train our contractors to keep this open-minded? Because they're used to having requirements on a contract that were very clear. Now we're just saying, work with the customers, figure out what they need, and we will give them work credit hours for any number of things. So it's been incredibly challenging, even though it's been kind of a starting over, getting the fundamentals. But sometimes that framing, anyway, is what really can unleash people to be innovative about, this is our new framing, now what? Now how do we tackle this challenge? And sometimes the old rules of what we thought was being innovative and creative don't really work.
Thank you, Sharon. All right, I have 1 or 2 questions just to get that started, and then we'll keep moving. So, but one question I have is around incentivizing the workforce, putting the right incentives in place, motivators. Sometimes there's money for awards, but then there's a lot of research that shows that money really isn't a motivator anyway. And then on the flip side, sometimes it may just mean like getting out of the way and letting people do things. So Sharon, you mentioned a few things. Well, what kind of things are your offices, your agencies doing to really encourage staff to be innovative, to really empower them to be innovative? This is for any of you.
Okay, actually, while I have the mic, I'll keep this one short, I promise. One of the things that I realized we had a real issue with recognition. Our employee viewpoint survey shared that. I took it from OPM, sorry, but I did bring it to local government. And we had recognitions, but they were for the wrong things. And we recognized people for working really hard and working late and sort of pure muscle kind of work. And what we needed to do was change what were the criteria for Employee of the Month. And it was a fundamental thing. Our Employee of the Month is now for creative, innovative fix to a long-standing problem. I mean, that is what it takes. It was just really redefining that. And not only then recognizing those employees, but then blasting it out to everybody on the internet. We have a Stanley Cup trophy that they get on their desk. But we want people to know, oh, that's what it takes. It's not just because I'm working really hard. And so that was just it's helped in terms of us recognizing the right things and then sharing it so people all see it.
Well, I guess I would differentiate between both internal and external innovation. I mentioned externally how we work with new partners through grant challenges, and that's been just a very practical way for us to, as USAID, to work with folks we've never worked with before. So across all our grant challenges, we've funded now over 150 different innovators, most of whom had never worked with USAID before. And so when we think about innovation, our number one rule is diversity of opinion and perspective and background. And so that's been a very helpful way for us to crowd in those new perspectives. Internally, I think, you know, it's as much about IQ as it is about EQ on our team. And so change management cannot be underrated. So by definition, innovation is something new and different. And so oftentimes in bureaucracies, as I'm sure all of us can appreciate, inertia oftentimes sort of rewards the status quo. And so we have a team that I think recognizes, and we dedicate time to training around some of these change management pieces, so that recognizing that doing things in new ways and bringing people along is as much art as it is science. So that it requires you to make the technical case for why to try new things in new ways, but it also requires the softer skills to sort of bring people along. And I think that that's oftentimes sort of something that's under-invested in when thinking of these new innovation groups. So we dedicate a lot of time to making sure that change management piece and putting our team through leadership trainings and those types of things are important parts of that.
All right, so another question I have is, and we had a breakout group around this, is just around tools, methodologies, approaches that you have found helpful just to be more innovative and creative. So David, you mentioned a couple of things around human-centered design thinking, and I know there are some federal departments that have adopted that approach. What are the kinds of things you're using in terms of like tools, methodologies, things like that to help people just be innovative, come up with creative ideas, implement some of these things we're talking about?
At Labor, we've tried to do a lot of reframing in terms of changing up the old, and some simple examples. So within our suite in our office, we have a conference room that I named the think tank, and it's kind of neat. It actually is like an enclosed conference room within a suite, but it has little transom windows at the top. So I actually have intended to put little fish decals up there to really make it a think tank, but I need to actually follow through on that. But it's just, it changes people's mindset when they walk in the room. That it honors that thinking is being done in there, and we use it so much. And I'd say a lot of spaces within the Francis Perkins building at Labor, it's like 1 million square feet, are super dull and kind of boring. So just to kind of reframe it like that. We've also done a lot with visual communications. One of our strategies for marketing the FBBS survey last year was taking a positive approach, because we knew people weren't quite feeling it. So we actually had a poster with big letters at the top that said what's working, and then in smaller letters said, and what can we do better? We want to hear from you. Previously, I think messaging was more oriented into how can we improve, what do we need to do, but we really wanted to kind of shift the focus on, yes, we know it's a tougher work environment than maybe it's been in past years especially, but we're still doing some stuff that we should get credit for. So I think some of those examples just kind of try to turn previous thinking on its head in an innovative way that sticks.
Maybe I'll just mention a recent example. So next month we're about to launch a set of resources for our global health colleagues around the globe called Innovation Realized. And it's a set of tools and resources that helps to define innovation. So really demystify this sometimes awful buzzword that gets us into trouble. Talks about why we need it, so it really makes the case for it. And then in the context of how our colleagues around the world work, lays out practical tools that we have at USAID at our disposal, whether they be prize competitions, grant challenges, new innovative procurement models, best practices from the private sector in incentivizing innovation, are all at people's fingertips. So this is, as we've started with a small team and with the center that I lead, thinking more about how we can mainstream some of these ideas, but making it very practical. So taking the buzz out of some of what comes with innovation.
And just to add, and again, I think in general, my agency is, more at a nascent stage in terms of being an innovative environment, and a lot of that has, there's services that we provide that are very rote. We have folks who've been working in the same job for decades, and so sometimes you just need to outsource it. So we have a lab in our city administrator's office. We go to them with a problem. We don't have people complying with recertification, and they help design different kinds of mailers to see if some get better responses than others. But what we do when those things happen is we spend time then sharing that with staff, that these things that seem intractable or huge problems, you can fix it, and if not you, there are people out there that do, but just opening up the possibility that there are other ways has been key. And we also brought in consultants to help us with some business process redesign work. And in that, we have the staff, the line staff in those sessions, and having someone really directed saying, what is the pain point? Why do you do that step? Why are you doing that if they're doing that? It has to, it's very tightly facilitated, but that also has been, I think, really helpful for line staff to say like, oh yeah, well, I don't know why we do that. And so it's, it's been pulling it out, but I think, the outcome is, this mindset that, hey, there is change is possible, and guess what? It yields improvements and efficiency.
Great, okay. So I asked our panelists to come up with a question or two for each other. So let me go to one or two of those. So Kristen, I believe you have a question you wanted to ask?
Sure, and if there's time, I'd love to have this question apply to both of you if you're willing. I'm really curious about how you regain your inspiration, your creative spark when it is feeling super low.
Great question.
Okay. Well, I would say for me personally, it's pretty easy. We get the opportunity at USAID to get out into the field, and the field are in the countries in which we work. And we often get the chance to visit with our innovators who are implementing on the ground. So often, a day in my world can be miserable. It's paperwork, it's all the stuff that is not innovative, right? But it's a means to an end. And so my job oftentimes, I feel like, is clearing the way so that my team can do the work that they need. But if I'm not re-energized, I'm not willing to take on all those little eddy currents that often revolve around the main issues that we're working on. And so for me, a great way to do that is to get out in the field and meet with the innovators that we're supporting and remind myself, and so that I'm able to also inspire the team why what we do is important, and turning innovation into impact is the ultimate goal, and being on the ground where these innovations are driving impact is a great way to remind me of why I'm in this crazy bureaucracy. Don't quote me on that, please.
I do think a lot of what motivates me is sort of being a bureaucracy buster, and it's a slog. And I think anyone, I think local government people kind of roll their eyes. They envision the DMV and waiting forever, and it is a slog. And I personally do feel great. I get energized when I can look at someone who's the barrier, and they're like, there's a rule, you can't do that. And I say, show me the rule. And they actually don't really have a rule, but it's kind of by the way they've been doing it. So I do get great pleasure in those little wins, which I think that is sort of how you have the wherewithal to be a local government in this sort of operation space. So that keeps me going.
Okay, great, thanks. And David, I think you had a question for
Yeah.
panelists.
Well, I'll ask both, too. And I sort of alluded to this earlier. Driving change is hard, and especially being on the front lines of that sometimes on my team, which often brings in younger people who are new to government, can be challenging and emotionally taxing. How do you both sort of support your team in that way, and also equip them sort of with some of those softer skills to drive change in the face of bureaucracy and status quo?
So the first thing I thought of when you started talking about change is piloting. and creating safe space to experiment that's not huge. I think the biggest thing we try to do, and this is a daily reminder on our team, and I think other places in labor have kind of caught on, but incremental change can be okay, and it can be like a spark that helps to catch fire when you can create the environment for the right fire and a good fire moving forward. So just a brief example, we wanted to launch a mentoring program at Labor, but we knew based on other things our training and development team had on their plate that we couldn't do it as full-fledged in terms of as many matches, and we couldn't do it as hardcore as we would have wanted to. So leadership was quite comfortable with a pilot, and in that space, the team was able to be incredibly creative because there wasn't really a risk of failure. If it didn't work, we could do something official later on. So I think piloting has been our strategy to, like I said, create that safe space that makes people feel comfortable and then motivates people from all different generations on our team, because they get to bring their best ideas to the table and they don't all have to be market researched and tested along the way. Like the experiment is the process.
It's interesting. I do think that we don't have enough young people coming into my agency. We have very little turnover. We give anniversary pins for folks at different milestones. I've been at this job for 4 years. I've given multiple 50-year pins to people. And people, I mean, the good and the bad is they don't want to leave. They love it. The bad is they can't always afford to leave because we have folks who are GS7s, CS7, GS7. It's very akin, but it's living in DC. That is not enough to live on, to retire on. And so people often have to keep working well beyond. So, reshaping the workforce and bringing in new energy is something that is not really a sort of a tool that we can have in our toolkit in certain units. And so we are really at some of the fundamentals with employee engagement and getting people to feel like they can have a say. And so. And it's much harder for people who've been doing a job for a very long time to believe it. And for people who have a job that's very tenuous, when you work in a service center where people are in line to get TANF, many of our workers were in those lines at one point, and I think there was a mission at some point to, hey, we should walk the walk and hire people that were on TANF, but they know what that feels like, and so creating any sort of strife with their supervisor means, wow, that means that I could be in line, and so we're at the point where we just want people to feel like they are able to raise their hand and say, hey, what about? And there won't be any sort of negative repercussion. So it's very different kind of culture, and trying to foment innovation and change. We sort of have to go to the basics.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to you all. So this is about top-level leadership and their support for the things we're trying to do around innovation, and just unleashing a creative workforce. And Kristen, I think you alluded to this a little bit with DOL, at least in terms of past leadership having support for it. So the question is around, are you finding really at the top levels of your agencies, organizations, support for some of these initiatives? And also, are you having to spend some of your time sort of sewing up, educating execs about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve?
So as you mentioned, yes, I'd say that our previous administration was more visibly supportive of innovation, but we've drawn on some business skills on my team in terms of repackaging and getting to our goal, but while being palatable to our current leadership. So one example is our ROAD program. That stands for Repository of Opportunities, Assignments, and Details, and it's basically short-term details, 4 months, that developmental opportunities, and that was very well supported. It was created under the past administration, but we know that our current Assistant Secretary for Administration and Management is super big into training. He's not quite as visibly big into development, but we did try to meet a need in terms of we're doing so much less hiring than we were before, and there's been some team dynamics that need some shaking up. So we basically said, okay, so we have this great program that can fit this need. What about using ROAD to fill vacancies because people are leaving and it gives people opportunities? So as soon as we talked up the training component of it, the development piece kind of swooped in with it. So it's been incredibly helpful. Actually, our Office of the Secretary just recently called me to say, we want to do a road detail for an administrative assistant who's been at labor for 35 years. And she just left, and we're kind of devastated, and we need to make sure that this particular position is really careful about, or this person that would be in this role is really careful about sensitive information, because they're working very closely with the Deputy Secretary. And it was just great to have this tool that like met that need. And then the DepSec is the ASAM's boss, and so when the DepSec was raving about it, the ASAM was like, oh, well, that was kind of my idea. So it's all about positioning and using a program that we already have, I'd say, in an innovative way.
So I don't want to sound like a shill for our mayor, but I actually think we have a very, very hard-charging executive, and then the director of our agency, who sets these really, really hairy goals, ending homelessness, closing DC General. Actually, it was funny, Steve Goldsmith had a picture of the DC hospital, which when they closed it, hooray, then opened up to be the family homeless shelter for over a decade. So that was something this mayor said, we're gonna close it. We're gonna close it before my next election. It's gotta be closed. So we've got 300 families that were living there. So those kinds of sort of North Star goals meant that when we said we need to do shelter differently, we need to have small shelters all over the city, that meant, yikes, she's gonna have to go to every ward and say, guess what you're getting? You know, everyone wants a new rec center, they don't want a new family shelter. And she did it, and she got a lot of heat, but everyone gets one. So, and these shelters are beautiful, and they have 40 families in them, and we're cycling families through. They're no longer staying for a year in shelter. It's 90 days, it's working. But we have said, if you want us to get there, here's what we need from you. And our homeless services budget has doubled. We have a $500 million budget. So, you know, that has helped. The executive has responded to what we've said. Here's what we need to do that. We've been really fortunate we've gotten it. But so we didn't need to do the convincing. Sometimes we need to manage expectations about what's realistic and what it's going to cost.
All right, so what questions do you all have? You could raise your hand. Yeah, back here. And if you could wait for the mic and just give your name and organization.
Hello everyone. My name is Shakila. I'm a recent graduate from local government and transition from a university from Turkey. So my question is from Ms. Sharon. I'm happy to see you here, and I can say, I want to share my experience as a citizen here using the benefits through Medicaid and all the benefits. So I came to the DC. Thanks God that I'm familiar with technology and online and this thing. I tried to apply for Medicaid. So it took like 3 months. I couldn't get anything, even any response. I tried to call, 45 minutes on phone, nobody responded. 45 minutes. I'm a person never give up. Never, ever. I'm such a person following up. So then I tried to do online, because this is like innovation for government through technology and customer service, and that's why I'm trying to sharing my experiences and then giving my ideas. If it would be better. Then I started my account. I did it online. Then they asked me for documentation. I didn't know how to mail it, and I because it takes time and cost money going to here. So I wanted to upload it. So I went to the account. I tried to find some option for uploading. I couldn't find anything, nothing. I was like, oh, how can I upload my document? So I think I can understand that government spent a lot of money for this web browser and technology. So then I moved to Virginia within 2 weeks.
So what is your question?
So
please?
question is, how about if the government tried to talk with the staff who are involved with the citizen directly and to ask them their comments and thoughts. For example, when once I approved for my benefit, then I couldn't hear back from following up, hey, for example, this is, you are eligible. So I trying to, calling them, nobody is responding about the voice messages, emails, or even online system. I mean, how about if the government being innovative through the technology better for being responsive
So the
on
question
time?
is about how do you get staff, customer-facing staff.
Yeah, and
responsive,
more is responsive.
Innovations
Yeah.
around that in technology. So any thoughts?
I mean,
or
I
comments on
can
that?
understand a lot of money spending for,
Okay,
all
So,
this.
thank you.
and I'm gonna assume you're looking at the before, there have been some huge changes, which we won't go through, but I'll just tell you, first and foremost, one of the things, and this is more about change management than innovation, but government workers, especially those that have customer-facing roles, they have two hats. They have a compliance gatekeeping hat, and they have a customer service, customer care hat. And it's very hard for frontline government workers to sort of know when, which hat should I have on, because there are lots of rules and things you need to check off before you can give this federal benefit. And yet, how am I making sure that I'm meeting the needs of the customer? So we spend a lot of time saying err on the customer care, customer experience hat, and not as much on the rules. But when you're not confident in what you do, you don't have good training, you don't have good tools, folks will always fall into the gatekeeper role. And so anyway, that's been a big change management effort. We do have better technology, both telephony and online. We don't have an online portal yet. It's been I don't want to tell you how many millions of dollars we spent on an eligibility system and IT projects. When you have huge, this gets back to procurement is really, when you have huge firm fixed IT projects that are trying to do really complicated work, I feel like it's a miracle when they are successful. So anyway, that's another Harry story, but I'm sorry for your story and glad you're in a better spot.
All right, another question? Yes, let's hear it.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Huon with the GAO, and you mentioned using human-centered design as an innovation. And I've heard of human-centered design being used when people design, technology platforms, but I'm wondering how you apply it to other processes and efforts in your agencies.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think one of the things we've tried to do is remind folks that innovation and design, we define it in four different ways. One is the product or offering, and that's what oftentimes people think of as the widget. In our world, it's the medical device or the diagnostic tool, but it's also a new business model. It can be a process, and it can also be an internal way in which you're sort of structured and incentivizing innovation. So we try to delineate between the four. There's a group called Doblin who have created what are called the 10 types of innovation. So if you Google this, you'll see these 10 types. And they did, when they were, many years ago, they used to do an annual survey that would look at the return on investment for design and innovation. And the return on investment was actually the smallest for product or offering. And it was often largest for new business model or new financial system or new supply chain, for example. And so we try to remind folks that in fact, when you think about applying design, the value of design is actually what surrounds oftentimes the widget or the product. It's that sort of ecosystem, systems level design that really unlocks potential value.
Just to follow up on that, since you mentioned kind of return on investment and value, and often innovation, it is kind of hard to measure. Are there ways that techniques you all are using, metrics or what have you, to measure the either the impacts of innovation or things you're coming up with? What are some ways to measure it, at least think about how to capture the value that it's adding to whatever product or service or
Yeah, I mean, we think about that a lot in global health. We're drowning in data, and oftentimes, we're asked, how do you prove your value? Well, I think one thing is clearly defining what the expected outcomes are, and so there's always that potential health impact. But we also try to make it more nuanced. And so in the case of grand challenges, we think about sort of secondary benefits of investing in some of this longer term innovation or R&D. So things like leveraged funding. So our Saving Lives of Birth Grand Challenge, USAID's every year $2 million leverages another 8 from the Gates Foundation, from Norway, from others. It also has catalyzed a global community of problem solvers. So folks working on, in this case, maternal and newborn health, who wouldn't otherwise have been working on it. Increased attention and focus on these issues. And so there are some of these softer pieces that allow us to sort of clearly articulate what the value is of innovation. We also, in the private sector, they have for many more years been measuring this. And so there are a lot of examples from the private sector that aren't totally apples to apples in global health, but at least is a good analog for thinking about why it's important to invest in innovation. So things like looking at the top performing Fortune 500 companies and ranking them on their investment in innovation, you'll often see that they will outperform the market. So things like this that help make the case for innovation. I would also say, again, one more thing from the private sector is that traditionally, especially med tech pharma companies, invest between 10 and 20% in innovation or R&D. As I mentioned earlier, our group is 2.5% of just Washington staff. So that's not to say that we're the only innovation happening in global health Washington. In fact, we're not. We're a small part of it. But that's, I think, an important reframing of the question when we talk about why are we investing in innovation. And instead of, sort of nibbling around the edges of where we are today, I think what we need to be saying is, well, what can we learn from the private sector? And it's probably not 2.5%, it's probably not necessarily 20%, but it's probably somewhere in between, and create more of a strategic question around that, and benchmark ourselves against the private sector who have a sort of inherent incentive to invest in things that work, and they found that innovation is an important part of that.
So when it comes to alleviating poverty and homelessness, don't really have the same kind of ROI, but we definitely do have a ton of data and use data to show that these upfront investments really do have long-term savings. A family in shelter is $40,000 a year because you're providing food and you're providing transportation and you're providing case management. And if you can, do a step down to a rapid rehousing program, yes, you're paying for rent, but not all those other things. And so, some of these investments that seem big sort of really do help. We make a case for why those are needed, and that in the long run, we'll get the results. I think we have great data. And the challenge that we have is that we are part of a larger ecosystem. So we have now been able to show for people that come into our front door because they have housing instability issues, who are we preventing from going into the shelter system? We always want to find ways that we can either route people back, stay in their home, or find some other alternative. We have great studies that show people who are exiting shelter system quickly and who are finding permanent housing. Our challenge is that the homeless problem in DC and in other large cities is an affordable housing problem. So, even if people have a job and are in a stable environment, their job may not be enough to pay the rent, and there aren't enough housing units where they can pay the rent. So our inflows now have all these other negative externalities, that no matter how good we do our job, that's a bigger problem. And so that's part of our challenge too, is to sort of isolate, here's what we're doing great, because the bigger outcome doesn't necessarily show that.
All right, another question from the audience? Okay, I can ask another one of mine then. We had some breakout groups earlier. We've heard a lot of great things from you all. In terms of some lessons learned from your experience, what are some sort of best practices, lessons learned that you all have that you think might be helpful for other folks? If you can think like more broadly than just your work, what kind of things have you kind of learned and takeaways that you might give to other people in terms of what kind of works, what's effective?
I would say remain flexible because it's a key ingredient to having any kind of success. So I mentioned that we, in the past administration, founded an innovation council. We don't currently have it right now. I actually have a couple people helping to turn the innovation council, its past form, into an employee affinity group, because the challenge was without as much top-level visible leadership, we didn't have as much impact across the organization. So now we're kind of starting from an employee-led, like grassroots effort to kind of bring it back and really meet people where they are in terms of discussing innovation, talking about tools. So I'd say it's remaining nimble because change is inevitable, as we know. And then also staying as simple as possible. I think, especially in the federal government, that's where most of my experience is. Things are complicated just because I think they're supposed to be, or that's the misnomer, that they're supposed to be complicated, because if they're complicated, then they're important, then they're worth the budget money that we're putting towards it. So I think really breaking things down to the base level and thinking through, and one kind of flop that we had as part of our more robust innovation era, I would say, is we created our own idea mill, which is basically like an idea generator, an ideation platform. And we really should have bought an off-the-shelf product because we created it in-house, but it didn't have as many features as something that we could have bought. And the customization became super heavy. And part of it was that we had, cool graphics, but not as much of the functionality because we kind of spent the money on the look and feel and not so much on the functionality. And what we discovered is that we thought we were meeting a need by bringing this ideation platform to our employees, but what we found is that they said, the Francis Perkins building is ugly, or my light above my office keeps going out. So it was like a lot of facilities-based stuff that wasn't really innovative, and so I think what we didn't do is educate our customers in terms of the employees giving us ideas, what we were really looking for, what was in it for them. I mean, it basically became like a template vehicle. So it really blew up because we haven't done a lot of the things, even at the facilities level, that employees have asked for, and that had so many trickle effects in terms of people. I mean, it might have kind of offloaded some of that complaining from the FEVS to this ideation platform, but it just didn't give us what we wanted. So we just pulled the plug, and that was hard for the people who invested money and hard for our relationship with IT, who felt like they failed. And I kind of had to have heart-to-heart to say, yeah, you kind of did. Like, these are the things that would have been smart to consider. If you think of the overall investment, just because it had a pretty picture, like, it didn't do these really basic things. So I think it's being willing to say that wasn't successful, but here's how we can recover, and here's what we can learn from that to move forward another time.
So two things. One, and I spent most of my time today talking about my DC government experience, but also at the federal government, we had similar sort of almost this innovation gimmick day, hey, we've got this platform, and send us your idea, and we'll make a little podcast, video of them. But the meat of those ideas were pretty lame. And I don't think that it can be, if it's a gimmick, like look how innovative we are, but there's not really a lot of scaffolding around it. And I do feel like the HHS lab, Idea Lab, is an example of something that really goes deep. But the gimmicks don't work. It's not that meaningful, and people are just going to use it for their sort of small scale kinds of things. Thing one. But then thing two is that truly, it's not one size fits all, and that every workforce is different and has a personality and a culture. And so how you try to motivate creativity and innovation is going to be different. And so I think it's worth taking the time to do some homework to see what the barriers are and what really is going to release those ideas, because I can think of private sector, I've worked across many industries, and I would have a different approach in each one.
Take one last question. Anybody has one? Okay, so I have one last question for each of the panelists, and so this is in a sentence, one sentence. What's one practical suggestion you can leave us with that each of us can do to individually encourage and foster more innovation and creativity in our own workplaces. So what would be one kind of sentence of wisdom you could leave us with?
A run-on sentence, or?
Sure, I'll allow that.
I would say make it practical, but make it exciting and fun, and celebrate successes. I think we talked about how do you measure the return on investment in innovation, and those are really helpful, especially during budget decisions. But what's even been more powerful, I think, is being able to tell our story, and we've done that through videos and blogs and stories that have appeared in the New York Times and things like that. Those making it real and practical so that people can see what innovation looks like when it's realized is really, I think, the most important part.
I would say use the tools that you have and attempt to turn them on their head. This is more than one sentence, so let me just give a qualifier.
You've got a run-on sentence too.
I sure do. So we have a number of affinity groups, as I mentioned, at Labor, and one of them is Toastmasters, and I will admit that I had a very biased, outdated impression of what Toastmasters was, and I just became a member, and I just went to my first couple of meetings. It's super fun, and people are creative, and it really helps to improve confidence while speaking, but I had this like archaic vision of podiums and gavels and formality, which I literally try to avoid at all costs. So just use the tools that you have and shake them up, because you may be surprised that something that you already have is actually a secret weapon.
I think I probably touched on this already, but just sometimes it's a really fundamental question of why. Why do we do this? Is there another way? Can actually be the best triggers.
Excellent. Great point to end on. So I want to thank our panelists very much, and let's give them a big round of applause. So we're reaching the end of our morning, so Terry Gerken is going to give us a few last comments, and then we have a short survey.
Thank you. So don't leave till you've done the survey. That's the first piece. As I mentioned at the beginning, the time for innovation in government is really now, right? All of us are facing challenges, both with our workforces, the problems just seem to be getting bigger. And today I think was a really creative and thoughtful and practical approach to how do you take these ideas and put them into place in your own offices. And so I think when we heard from Stephen Goldsmith this morning, he started us sort of at the general level, right? He talked about how to ask the right question and how asking the right question can really start the creativity process. And then he said that the big disruptive innovations happen across agencies. So are we growing and are we developing and are we thinking about people who can work across those agency silos? Because very few of our challenges in government can be solved in one specific agency or division. So how do we think about working with folks in other organizations to ask those questions and bring everybody's tools to the table? Then you all got in your breakout sessions, and I was really impressed with the feedback there. What I took away, maybe you did as well, was that it was the integration of people and technology and process that really leads to change. And so as you're thinking about what's happening in your organization, asking the right questions, but bringing the right people to the table, looking at your tools and your technologies, and then integrating those to solve the problems through process reform to deliver new solutions. And here, I loved your stories. The ability to really get practical on innovation. So it's not just the cloud on your PowerPoint chart that says, do more innovation, right? We've all seen those. You're like, yes, we're gonna do more innovation. But how do you do it? So Krista and I wrote down, doing something good with something that went wrong. That's key, and we heard that earlier about making people feel comfortable with the idea of trying things. And that when they don't go right, what did you learn from it? How do you turn it into something that's really positive? David, I loved your grand challenges. I'm going to talk about mine in a minute. But having innovation that's both instrumental and incremental and disruptive. So how do you do both? How do you think about moving change in little bites that creates a big change as you go along? And Sharon, when you need to innovate on your innovation, right? When what you did 2 years ago is not innovative anymore, and how do you think about continuous process change so that you can continue to deliver better customer support all across the line? And so I really thank all of you. I think this process and the conversation today has really helped us go from the general idea to the specific. How do we take these concepts and how do we put them in place? I just want to note for all of you should have had a card on your chair about grand challenges at the Academy. We are actually trying to bring innovation to this field of public administration. So that sounds a little academic maybe, a little complicated, but we're all about trying to get feedback from the broader public on the big issues facing the field of public administration. So we would love for you to take this in concert with what you've heard this morning and give us your feedback too on how we can address the issues of both what government needs to do for the next decade and how we need to do it. So we want you to bring your creativity and your innovation to that question as well. All right, so John, I'll turn back to you.
Okay, we just want to ask you to do a quick survey, so we'll call up this slide, and so we're going to skip this one and go to the so if you could take out your phone and go to open up your browser, whether it's Google or Safari or what have you, and go to menti.com, menti.com, and when you go to that site, it'll ask you for this code. So enter this code, 790029. So once you enter that code, these questions will pop up, and I've got a few slides here of questions, and you'll be able to answer them. So in a short sentence or phrase, what's one takeaway for you from the panel discussion?
Those questions don't come up for me, so I don't know if that's working for anybody else, so.
What questions?
Anybody can do is there. Mine isn't working.
Did you put the code in?
Yeah, I did. My question is a little different. What else would you like to share with the conference? Right, that's exactly what I got.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, so this one person got, just bear with us then, because then we'll just go through these. So, is there a few responses? So you probably can't all see them, so I'll read some of them. Innovation is tough business. Diversity of perspective is vital. Fail quickly. Innovation is possible even in big government. Innovate your original innovation. Good lessons learned. All right. Maybe go to the next slide. Okay, so this, I think you have to go back. All right, so if you could please rate the following statements on a scale from strongly disagreed to strongly agreed. So there's 4 items here, and you'll have a scale. If this question pops up, you should have a scale that you can rate these questions. About all of you have weighed in here, 30 responses or so. Okay, excellent. And next question, we just have a few of these. So we're looking forward to holding other events in the future around innovation. So here's some possible topics. So if you could choose all that apply. What would be interesting to you to look at as a topic, and just check all of them that apply. Looks like a fairly even distribution. Looks good. I'm curious about learning more about topics.
Should have put it with like a bogus answer in there.
Okay. All right, and then next slide. What format would you like the subtopics to be presented in? And again, check all that apply. We can do another half-day conference, a full day, 1 or 2 hour morning session, lunchtime brown bag. I can do it online. A lot of different ways we can do it. So, which formats would be helpful for you, and which that you would like? Okay, so looks like the half-day conference worked for a lot of you, but some of you are also saying, 1 or 2 hour morning session might work, and some of you like some of the other formats too, so excellent. All right, next. Next slide. Maybe the last one, if we can't get to the next slide.
Just curious, are you in a website right now or a
Okay.
PowerPoint?
Okay, the last one is this. What else would you like to share with the conference organizers? So this is optional. If you want to type in a few things for us to know. It looks like some of you have done this. So this is the last question. So thank you again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.